Welcome to LaGrange First Church of God. This is our weekly podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
So, as I was reading through this, there was one word that kind of resonated, and I thought about as I was listening or reading through this passage, and it was homecoming. Like thinking about the idea of coming home, a homecoming. And so as I was thinking through that, there was a story that came to mind. And for those of you that either, if you're a literary follower or you enjoy literature, you know this. If you're the type of person that maybe don't follow literature or potentially slept through high school English, then I'll refresh your memory. So in approximately the 8th century BC, so a little while ago, there was an individual by the name of Homer. Now, just so you know, it was not the one on your left. It was the one on the right, and they didn't have a good picture. At that point, they didn't have the iPhone 11 with the multiple, I don't know. They didn't have that, so we don't have a picture. We just have this. And Homer, he wrote 2 epics. Does anybody know the name of the epics? What? The Iliad and the Odyssey. Okay, so if you didn't know that, you could now teach high school English, because I told you the 2 main things. It is. Jason would know. It's super easy. Those are the only 2 things you got to know about, Odyssey and Iliad. I want to focus on one of those. And the story I want to focus on is the Odyssey. And to give you the Cliff Notes, which is basically what you probably read instead of the actual epic. So the idea of this is there's this person named Odysseus. Now, Odysseus is a king of Ithaca. And as the king of Ithaca, he is part of Greece, like the city-state. And so because of that, if somebody's got a beef with Greece, basically, you have to go as the king. That's kind of the idea of being part of this group of city-states. So he went, and unfortunately, there was a king that had an issue with Troy, and we're not going to get into that. You can watch, there's, Brad Pitt movie, Troy. You can watch that. So that is Troy. But Odyssey basically takes place after that. So after Odysseus goes, and this is not going to work. It worked first service. All right, so if you look up here, this is basically Troy, okay? And so what happens is there's an issue, and so this is Ithaca in Greece, okay? See that? Not real far apart. But the problem is, in the process, so they win at Troy, the Greeks, take over. Odysseus gets to go home. Now, even a man not taking directions wouldn't get this lost. So if you notice, this is Troy, this is Greece. He ends up, this is Spain, and so the thing is in this story, basically he deals with, the first place he goes, they eat something, and then they get attacked and killed. Like 72 of his men get killed. He deals with eating a flower that makes all of his men not know what's going on for a while. He deals with Cyclops, with this giant thing with one eye, and they have to sneak out of there. He deals with an island full of cannibals, which eats most of his men. He deals with the underworld, which in Greek mythology, he has to go there and talk. He deals with sirens, where he makes all his men put things in their ears so they can't hear, and he has to hear and deal with it and wants to go see them. He deals with a 6-headed serpent. Now, the funny thing is, he had a choice. He could choose a whirlpool that was like a living whirlpool or a 6-headed serpent. And he decides to go with the 6-headed serpent because, the cool thing there is it can only eat 6 guys at a time. So, the whirlpool, they'll take the whole ship, or you just sacrifice 6 guys. So I would love to see how they figured out which 6 guys got to stand on deck and figure that out. But he chose that direction. He goes to this island with Calypso, a few other things. Calypso, he stays there for 7 years. She's a nymph, again, if you mythology. 7 years. He'd already been out 3 years before that. And then finally, Hermes kind of convinces her to let him build a ship. And he ends up with the Phaeacians, which take him on a magical ship back to Ithaca. Does that look like a 10-year journey to you? No. For those of you, it's literally across the Aegean Sea. So, 10 years, the story. A lot of hardships, a lot of crazy things. He gets off track, unfocused, and then finally makes it home. Now, why does that matter? When I was in college, I went to Purdue, and no booing, I know. Hey, everybody else that comes up here gets to talk about Notre Dame and Michigan. I got a really good degree from Purdue, so boiler up. Now, when I was at Purdue, I lived in a fraternity, and it was a good time. I enjoyed that a lot. And one thing at Purdue that was big is homecoming. Okay, I know at high school, homecoming, like floats, and no, at a college, at a state college, if you've ever been to a state college on homecoming week, it is not just an evening thing. It's not just, it is the whole, nothing happens. There's no studying, Mom. Not during homecoming. There's not a lot got done during homecoming week, and professors know that. And the one thing that we did at our house, and they did a few other programs on the campus, is we had something called Founders Day. They also had this thing called Old Masters at Purdue, where they'd bring back alumni. But for us at Farmhouse, we would have Founders Day. And what that was is, we would encourage alumni to come back, right? We want alumni to come back to school. Now, you would think, okay, great. We didn't want, like, the bad alumni. The ones that come and destroy the kitchen and destroy the... No, we wanted the good alumni. So we would invite them, and they'd come speak. And one particular year we had, when I was in college, Sonny Beck. Now, for those of you who don't know who Sonny Beck is, I am very happy to say that Sonny Beck is a member of Farmhouse, and he graduated an alumni of that. He is the owner and basically founder of Beck's Hybrids, which is a fairly well-known, local, like not nationwide necessarily, but a very local, very well-known seed sales organization. And the cool thing with that is as a college freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, depending on the guy. It was really nice to have an alumni come back that was successful, right? Because he came back and he could tell you that you can graduate from here, you can go out, you can start a business, and you can make money. As a college student, it's nice to hear that, right? I'm spending it like just out, just making it rain on college. And I can make it back, right? That's the idea, is that this person can go out, and we appreciate this. Like we appreciate, as a college student, as a young person, I appreciate experience. I appreciate the fact that they have been there. They know what it's like. They have done it, and they can tell me what it's like to do it. I appreciate that they share their ups and downs. Okay, nobody wants to have somebody come to them when they're at their bottom or at the beginning of a race, at the beginning of a story, and be like, it was so easy. I'm rich, and I didn't do anything to get here. Nobody wants to hear that. Right? Like, we want to hear that they had to work to get there. That actually makes us feel better, because then when something bad happens, we know how to, it can be done. And the last part is knowing and hearing that you can do it. You can leave here. And this was at Purdue. You can leave Purdue, and you can be successful, and you can have a business, and you can make money. Right? It was amazing to hear that. So where does that take us? Well, I want to show you real quick here. So I'm going to read through this. We read some of it, and then I'm going to go back. So they preached the gospel in the city and won a large number of disciples. Now, what city is that? Well, I want to show you. I hope it's going to go. All right, so this is a map. Anybody like pictures better than words? Okay, we're going to show you some pictures. Now, this, if you notice, is a section of the Mediterranean, basically similar to the map, or a smaller chunk of the map that we saw for Odysseus, which I think was pretty interesting. So what they're talking about is, as they went through here, I think it's important sometimes to review. Now, this is Antioch. For those of you that didn't know, we've heard Antioch, right? Remember? Everybody remember from class? I'm just kidding. Remember from the other sermons, we've heard of Antioch. Antioch, there's two of them. Which, I know you'd be like, well, Ben kept saying Antioch, right? Well, there's two. So what you have to understand is there's one Antioch here. This one is Antioch of Syria. This is basically the main one where they started. So when we heard, what we heard earlier is that basically they were sent out, right? That was the Antioch they were sent from. It was a hub. It was kind of right in between European, the Middle East and Eastern Asia. So it was kind of a really big hub. There was a Syrian monarchy that had the same Antiochia or something like that, the 1st, 2nd, 20th, I don't know. They established 2 Antiochs in their kingdom. And so this is the start. So what they did to review everything that's happened in this process is they left from Antioch when they were sent out. They went to Salamis. Basically what they did is they preached in the synagogue, right? You remember hearing Ben say that? They went to the synagogue, they preached. Okay? So that's right there. Okay? Then what they did is they went to Paphos. Now Paphos is where they met Elymas, or the sorcerer. You guys remember that story? So right there is where they met that sorcerer. And they got him, obviously got the bad spirit out of him. They moved on. Okay, so that's Paphos. Then from Paphos, they went up here through the Mediterranean to Perga. Okay, in Perga, they landed. From Perga, they went up to Antioch. Now, what did that is the other Antioch. So we started at the Antioch in Syria. They went up, and they end up in the Antioch that is in Pisidia, which if you look in there when it says like Antioch of Pisidia or Pisidia Antioch, that tells you where it's at. It's basically kind of the territory that's in. And that is where they spoke in the synagogue, and they kind of introduced some of the Gentiles, right? They said, we can bring Gentiles into this. So that's that process there. From Antioch, what happened then is they went to Iconium. And as usual, they went to the synagogue and preached, right? And at that point, they were really receptive. And then what happened is the city got divided. And when the city got divided, okay, there was a threat. They fled. They shook the dust off. They left. And then they went down to this place called Lystra. Now, Lystra, that is when the lame man came into play. And obviously, the healed lame man, all the people are like, they're gods. And they're like, dude, we're not gods. Okay, fix that. And then the thing is, the funny thing, at that point, when they thought they're gods, it caused some problems in Antioch and Iconium. The Jews didn't like it, right? So they chased him back out of there. They tried to stone him. So from there, they went to Deborah. So that brings me back to this. Number 21, or verse 21, they preached the gospel in that city and won a large number of disciples. So we're at Deborah, or Derby. Sorry, not Deborah, Derby. These names. Everybody understand where we're at? That's the process in that map. We're going to try to keep that map in our brains, photo memory. I'll try to go back, but I don't know if that's going to allow me to do that. Now, as we go through there, once they won a number of disciples there, they returned. And this is where I want you to understand something. In this journey that Paul and Barnabas were going through, they returned. How many of you, if you knew for a fact someone who was waiting in an alley with a club, would go back to the alley? You wouldn't, right? Probably, thanks. To take them out, right? Okay. You wouldn't go back. Like if you know that there are people there that are obviously out to get you, you're not going to go back, but they did, okay? And why? They went back, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch. So again, if you look at this, so they were here, they went down to here because they got chased out, and they went back. So they basically kind of circled around up in there, and they went. And what was the purpose? To strengthen the disciples and encourage them to remain true to the faith. There was a reason. Obviously, if you had been there, you established disciples, you established people, and you leave them, it's going to be pretty easy for those people to just say, forget it. This is too hard. I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to deal with the Jews. Got things going on. We're just going to keep doing what the Jews are doing. I'm not going to keep going. So what they did is instead of just letting it go and going back home, they continued to go back. So they went back, strengthened disciples, and let them know, okay? They remain the truth of the faith, and they let them know we must go through many hardships, enter into the kingdom of God. Now, is it easier? How many of you find it easier to deal with something bad if you know something bad's going to happen? Anybody feel that way? Like if you know, like if you choose this, you're probably something bad's going to happen, but it has to be done. Okay, is it a little easier at that point to enter into that and have something bad happen? I guess for me, I would say yes. If I already know, okay, if I do this, it has to be done, but something bad's going to happen. At least I know it's going to be bad. I'm going to be mentally prepared for that. So they sit there and they say, you're going to have to go through some hard things, but we're here with you. We're going to help you through that. So how do they help you through that? Well, Paul and Barnabas appointed elders. And I think that word is positive. Okay, I think the fact that they picked people that had experience, that should have had a little bit of lifetime, a little bit of understanding, they picked them. Did they just like pick the old people and say, you're in charge? No. And that's the other thing you have to understand, is Paul and Barnabas were trying to establish something, and they went back to continue to do that because they knew the work had to be done. So what they did is they established elders for each of them in each church, and with prayer and fasting committed them to the Lord. So basically, they not only chose them, but they basically commissioned them. They prayed with them. They fasted with them. They established that God was in them and with them, and then said, in whom they had put their trust, they let them be in charge. So basically, they instilled the Lord, prayed with them, showed them how to pray and fast, and then installed them. And then once they had done that, so once they had gone back and really reiterated to these disciples, okay, you're ready. We have leaders. You've got to marinate on this. You've learned. You're now in charge. You keep going forth and creating disciples, okay? So from then, what they did is after going through Pisidia, they came into Pamphylia, and when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Italia. Now, what is that? Again, remember, they were up here. So then what they did is they went to Perga, in Pamphylia, which is the major, like the big area, Perga, and Italia, which is basically port cities. And they left. Okay? Why? Why is it so important to me to have an alumni come back and talk to me? Why is it so important for for Paul and Barnabas to go back and tell? Well, it's because if you have a story to share that is worth sharing, people want to hear it. And the thing is, if the alumni came back to Purdue and all they ever told me was, well, it's just too hard. You don't want to mess with it. Just go do something. Just go be a teacher. It's easier. So, but it's not. Like, we want to hear the testimony, and you should have one. Do you know your testimony? And the thing is, I'm not saying I'm not saying you need to have a testimony where like I was dead. If you do, that's great. But like I was dead and I saw, and I was brought back to life. Like that's not the testimony that I'm saying. I don't have the same testimony as Ben Stuckey. We don't. We just don't. Like I was raised in a church my whole life. I have been reading this, and people have been feeding this to me my whole life. Doesn't mean I'm perfect by any means. Don't ask my mother. So there have been times where I have downs. I still have downs. And then there's those days where like I feel like, hey, I'm winning. And then there's days I'm down. But ultimately, I have a testimony of the fact that God has been faithful in my life, my whole life. I think everybody can say that, but I can genuinely say, like, He has been blessing and faithfully in my life my whole life, and I've allowed that. Whereas some people obviously block that out for a portion of their life, and at some point you got to choose. So I know that my testimony is that He continues to be in my life, and I see a path that I'm trying to stay on. That's mine. But you kind of got to figure out what yours is. And the next thing is you got to know what your blessings are. Like I have 4 that run around. The other one tells me to run around and do things. I look at my blessings every day. Now, sometimes I yell at them. They're just so ornery. But they're blessing. I look at my family and the blessings of my family and that I have a house and that I have a job. And that. Do you say thank you for blessings? I promise you, God wants to hear that sometimes more than you being like, I just really need this new car. I mean, if you would say thank you for the one I have, maybe another one will come along. I know it's weird, but I'm not always good at that, promise. I'm somewhat of a pessimist at times. I like to say realist, but probably wrong there. So, have your blessings. Know your blessings. Be able to share what your blessings are. And to be honest with you, your story should have some overcoming hardships. Like the story we see up here, Paul and Barnabas overcame hardships. It's a lot easier for them to share the gospel and why they should be discipling other people when they have those hardships. It shows that they can persevere. No one, again, wants to hear, oh, I just walked into the city and everyone in the whole city became Jesus followers. I didn't even do anything. I just stood there. That would be awesome and God could do it, but I don't know that that's necessarily, I think God wants us to do. And sometimes doing is hard work. And the last part is you should have a short story to share. If you don't know the good news, which is the gospel, you need to learn that at least. I don't care if you memorize anything else in the Bible. It helps. But you really should read the good news and be able to share. Now, that doesn't mean you need to quote this. But it does mean that you can share it. And I want you to know something. You don't have to say it. You just have to live it. And that's the difference, too, is we think we need to be able to walk up to someone and quote like 400 scriptures and be like, hey, this is going to change your life. Well, it doesn't matter if your life looks like crap. It doesn't matter what that book's going to tell them. You need to be able to share it as a story, okay? So you need to be able to have a story that is worth sharing. Now, I wish Sadie was up here because I would have her quote every single statement and story and event that happened in The Grinch because I think I've watched it 400 times in the last week. Every morning she gets up. Grinch. Okay, for those of you who haven't been blessed with this, I'll give you the rendition if you've never seen it. Obviously, there's a grumpy individual who has a heart three sizes, whatever. I didn't memorize it enough, obviously. His heart's too small. He doesn't like Christmas. He hates the Who. Why? Well, to be really honest with you, the answer is he had a bad experience. He had a bad experience with Christmas. And basically that bad experience ruined Christmas for the rest of his life, up to this point. So the idea in the movie, obviously hates Christmas, and then finally someone shows him love. And he changed. Cindy Lou. Okay? Finally, his heart grew. He understood that love is more important, and he understood. Okay, so that's this one. Okay, that is my third grade teacher, and she was awesome. So, just kidding. That is not my third grade teacher. That is Scrooge. So if you've never seen Scrooge, at that point, again, it's a grumpy individual who disliked Christmas, and to be really honest with you, most of that reason is he had a bad experience, and therefore he hated Christmas. Now, through the process of learning and seeing in other people what love can do, he learned to love others and to show that obviously money is not that important, okay? This one was me trying to figure out what was going on in our vehicle. No, I'm just kidding. Clark Griswold, again, I'm just going to, disclaimer, it does have some rude humor, so if you're the type of person, you have to wait till you're older to watch it. Michael? Wait, later. Older. So, but in this movie, basically you have Clark who is preoccupied with all sorts of things other than what Christmas should be about, right? Decorations, competing, the family driving him nuts, and then finally what ends up happening is he realizes that family and love is more important even if bad things happen, right? Why does that matter? It's because we remember. I could sit here and tell you, I could explain to you with words, and I could actually get out like a lovely textbook and explain it with big words and definitions and the chemical makeup of your brain and why it is more important for you to love others than to love things, and why experiences help you grow, and why if you just open yourself up to love, it will make life better. Are you going to remember everything I just tell you, like big definitions? No. Why do those work? When you share your story, it matters. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you look right here, Paul and Barnabas kind of do the same thing. When they leave Derbe, they head to Attalia, and then they sail back to Antioch. Now, what I need you to understand here, remember there's two Antiochs. This is the one they came from. This is where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. They had been given a task. They didn't go home till the task was done. It was not fun. It was not easy. And the other thing that they received out of that is they have a story. They have street credit. People now will listen to what they have to say because they actually did it. They went out, and then what they did is, now that they have the story, they went home to the beginning, and they went, on arriving there, they gathered their church together and reported all that God had done through them and how he had opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. Now, why is this significant? Well, it's significant for a number of reasons. One, they opened the door to the Gentiles, which would, again, it's just reiterating what Peter had done, and that's huge. That is a bombshell to Antioch, which is a relatively conservative Jewish viewpoint. And so it was kind of, the fact that they did that, it shows that it can be done. You see, shows that it can be done. The other thing is, how many of you who can't necessarily go on a missions trip yourself, how many of you are just really made to feel better when you hear people coming back and saying how amazing and how much work was done by God? Even if you can't go, does it make you feel good to know that other people, through you, can go out and do things for God? This chunk right here, why does sharing your story matter? Well, sharing your story matter because stories are relatable. If I can personify a statement, an action, then it can be experienced. And if things are experienced, then I now know what I can do or how to do it. Okay? It also strengthens people. If someone who I feel am very consistently equal with can go do something, does that mean that I feel I can do it then? One example of this is totally off notes. Okay, anybody run a lot of distance running? Sam? No? Okay. How long, what's the fastest, in the early 1900s, what's the fastest we could run a mile? 6 minutes. Okay, then somebody broke the 5-minute mark, right? So for a long time, everybody assumed 5 minutes was nobody could go faster than that, right? You know, recently, somebody ran a mile in 4 minutes, under 4 minutes. So the thing with that is, if I can, and then what happens after that is multiple people can do it now. And so that's the part of this that you have to understand, is that when you hear a story, I could sit down and tell you, I could do the research, I could look at muscle mass, and I could look at lactic acid metabolism, and I could discuss the amount of carbohydrates that would have to be intaken, and the right mass, and the physics of running, and the distance, and the actual length of stride that you would have to have. How many of you would really just fell asleep when I started talking about all that? Thanks, CJ. I could cover all that and tell you that it physically can be done. But until someone does it and tells you the story about it, it's a little bit less reachable. The other thing is, why do we tell stories around a dinner table? Why do we sit down and tell jokes and listen about past events? Because it creates connections. If I can tell you a story and then you resound with that story, we now created a connection that will not be broken. It is very important to have a connection and share that story, because if I don't have that, it doesn't matter what I spew informationally to you. You will not care. I promise you, I've tried it in class. If I don't know the kid, if I don't have a connection with that student, it's a brick wall. It creates connections. That's why stories matter. That's why interaction matters. And the other thing that it does is it makes you more faithful. It makes you understand that even if today sucks, even if today is the worst day ever, that I don't think I can do this, it's frustrating beyond belief, and that's just the day my wife has when she lives with me, you can still do it. Because there have been people in worse places than you, and there's stories now. Not even in here. These stories are awesome. But there's people now who are living a lot worse situation than you that are worshiping a lot more faithfully than we do. That's fact. This cannot be shared. I'm just going to be honest with you. This is a hard read. Everybody agree? It's an awesome read. It's got some great information, but to just sit down and read this is kind of difficult. Could this have been written like a textbook to just follow, like a manual that you do? Is that how God decided to have this written? No. There is narrative after story, after narrative, after parable, and that is what he chooses. Now, there is still some technical information in here, but to get you started, do I sit down with my child, pull out a manual this thick, and have them tear apart an engine? No. That is just dumb. Now, will I sit down with them and do I make little stories and jokes about this part and where this part goes and what this part does? And I show them how the pistons go up and down and explain it with stories and fun activities? Yes. Why? Because they're a child. If you have never been to church, do you think me handing you this and say, just go read it, it'll be fine? Is that the best option? Not normally. Now, are there people that you can hand to them, they'll take it, read it, God gives them insight and it's phenomenal? Yes. The majority of people, if you just hand them a Bible and say, well, you got to figure it out on your own. Our job is to walk with them, to share stories with them, to bolster their faith, and share the fact that I had this. It may not be like you, but God made it work. That is how that's supposed to go. Now, last part of this is defending your story. Now, the funny thing is, there are times that me as a music addict, I'm a musical instrument addict, sorry about that. I try really hard, but there are times I come home and I go to my wife and I'm like, okay, now, anytime I say this, she just knows. I kind of want to buy a new guitar. Now, just hear me out. The guitar, okay, so you have to understand, I have had this other guitar for really, Aaron, I've had this guitar for a long time. I've used it. It's just, I'm starting to do some other things. I want to buy this because, honestly, the wood in it's better and the strings on it just sound a lot better. There's more resonance and the pickups in it are just so much more clear and when you plug it, like, there's a lot of people out here that can identify with this statement. Maybe even guns, I don't know. They're probably the same. Yeah, okay. And I'm sitting here explaining, like, it's just so much better. The case is better. It's a good deal. And literally she goes, stop. I don't care. Fine. Just stop talking. Like, she literally is like, just stop. Why do you do that? Shut up. Like, just stop talking. I don't care. And the funny thing is, the reason that I say all that is, for me at least, I'm trying to justify why. Now, she doesn't care. She understands now there are circumstances where it's a no matter how many times I plead. But in most cases, I've thought it through. I've driven her nuts, like thinking it through over and over again and running down every, grandma, don't laugh at that. I process it, and she's fine. She's like, whatever. I've already heard like 3,000 times why you think you should do this. But really, honestly, I plead opposite to the fifth. Like, I should be able to justify, right? If I have a story that is worth sharing, and I'm sharing that story, how many of you have ever been up against someone who can question your story? How many of you have ever been up against somebody who can question the gospel? Can you defend it? Can you pull from this as you grow enough information and enough faith and enough Holy Ghost to defend it? And it's hard sometimes. And I think sometimes we question, what does that look like? Well, it doesn't have to look like you quoting a verse. Sometimes it's just living a life. And they're going to see it. And it doesn't matter how much they question or defy you, you just live. And then eventually they start to see. And then when they see, they ask the right question and you'll have an answer. Or you'll be able to find the answer or find someone with the answer. That is what this means. You need to be able to defend. So, what does this mean for Paul and Barnabas? Well, what you have to understand, when they got back to Antioch, did they load up with provisions, shove their boat full of stuff, and head to the next big place? No. They had completed that commitment. They had committed to what they did. They went and did it. And then in chapter 14, verse 28, they stayed there a long time with the disciples. And the reason for that is they knew because of what that was in Antioch, because of the size, because of the hub, it was an important place to be at that point. And they were going to have to defend their position. Now, I want you to understand, I started with Odysseus. And the reason why I started with Odysseus is, you don't know the story, he had a lot of things going. Okay, he did 5 years at Troy. Approximately 5 years. They traveling, they fought, they won at Troy. And then he had 10 years in this story. So Odysseus had 10 more years in his travels back. So 15 years that he'd be gone. When he got back, was it just all hunky-dory? He kissed his wife and it was great? Happy ever after? If you don't know the story, it was not. Because while he'd been gone, 15 years is a pretty long time, right? So if you think about that, 15 years, if I was gone 15 years getting groceries, my wife would kill me. But 15 years he'd been gone. He had a son when he left. When he got home, all sorts of suitors and nobles, people who wanted the kingdom, had come to the palace and basically took over the palace. And they were squatting, and they were trying to force his wife into marrying one of them so that there would be a king and the kingdom would have They wanted his power. They were selfish. So when he got home, it wasn't just hunky-dory. He didn't just get to walk into his home, take his shoes off, kick his feet up, and watch some football. That's not how it went. The cool thing about it is that he reunited with his son who hadn't seen him in 15 years. And his son went with him. And they took out all of the would-be kings. It is our job to defend the story. Stay, hold your ground, and complete the call that God has given you. That story that you have is the only story like that story. And it is meant for someone, or more than someone. He told us, go make disciples in the Great Commission. He told us, teach them to obey in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, which is what name? Jesus' name, the only name. That is our job. Why? Because there's going to be a homecoming in heaven. And the thing is, it is our job to defend and expand this kingdom. It's not a choice. Now, it may be different for each one of us, but it's still our job. And it's important because I want the homecoming in heaven to be as big and beautiful as we can make it, with as many individuals as we can pull along. So have a story worth sharing. Don't hide it. Share your story. And be willing and able to defend the story to the very end, so that homecoming in heaven is full and glorious.
Thank you for tuning in. Please join us for next week's podcast.